Hello, my beautiful Virgo. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for being here and for spending this little moment with me. As always, just take a slow breath, settle into your own energy, and allow yourself to receive whatever resonates with your heart. Today's reading feels incredibly emotional. It feels gentle, but at the same time, it carries the weight of someone who is finally realizing that they may have waited much too long. So, let's see where this energy wants to take us. The very first card that caught my attention was the Star, and I couldn't help but pause for a moment. It feels like no matter how much distance has grown between you and this person, they've never completely stopped seeing you as someone special. There has always been something about your energy that quietly stayed with them, even during the silence, even when life became busy, even when they convinced themselves they were doing the right thing by stepping back, your light somehow continued to reach them. This person may have believed there would always be another opportunity, another conversation, another chance to explain themselves, another day to finally say everything they had been keeping inside. But life has a strange way of reminding us that not every opportunity waits forever. And lately, it feels like they're beginning to sense that your energy has changed. I keep picking up this feeling that you've started protecting your own peace. Maybe you haven't announced it, maybe you haven't made some dramatic exit, but something inside you feels different now. You're no longer waiting with the same expectation, and somehow, they feel it. That's what seems to be shaking them awake. Then Five of Cups appears, and the atmosphere becomes much heavier. This doesn't feel like someone who's only sad because they're lonely. It feels deeper than that. It feels like regret, the kind of regret that quietly follows someone when they replay old conversations in their mind. The kind that whispers, "I should have called. I should have stayed. I should have told Virgo how I really felt. Oh my God. I almost feel like they're having conversations with you inside their own head, thinking about things they wish they had said months ago, wondering how different everything could have been if they had simply chosen honesty instead of silence. The silence itself feels important here because Four of Swords keeps showing me someone who believed staying quiet was somehow protecting both of you. Maybe they needed time to think. Maybe they thought distance would make their feelings disappear. Maybe they assumed you would always understand without needing an explanation. But instead of creating peace, that silence slowly became a wall. Day after day, it grew higher, until they weren't even sure how to climb over it anymore. Yeah, sometimes people don't realize the damage silence can create until the person on the other side finally stops knocking. And that's exactly what I keep feeling around your energy, Virgo. You may not have stopped caring completely, but it feels like you've started choosing yourself. You're finding small moments of happiness again. You're rebuilding your own routines. Little by little, you're becoming emotionally independent from the outcome of this connection. That's the moment that seems to have frightened this person the most, because when they thought you would always be there, they felt comfortable waiting. But now, it seems like they're wondering if they've already missed their chance. As Page of Cups comes into the reading, I feel something beginning to soften inside them. It's almost like watching someone rehearse an apology over and over before finally finding the courage to speak. They may not know exactly what words to use. They may not even know whether you'll listen, but there's a growing desire to reach toward you instead of away from you. I can't help but feel that this isn't coming from pride anymore. It's coming from vulnerability. They know they kept you waiting. They know there were moments when you deserved reassurance instead of confusion. They know that love cannot continue surviving on unspoken feelings forever. What feels especially meaningful is that this realization doesn't seem forced. Nobody had to convince them. Nobody had to tell them what they lost. Life itself has been showing them. Every quiet evening, every memory that suddenly appears without warning, every moment they wish they could share with someone, somehow brings them back to you. Whether they're ready to say it out loud or not, their heart seems to be arriving at one simple truth. Losing you feels far more painful than facing the fears they once kept running from. And as these cards continue unfolding, I have a feeling this awakening is only the beginning, because there's another layer beneath all of this silence that hasn't revealed itself just yet. The Hermit feels impossible to ignore here because this energy doesn't look like someone who stopped caring. It looks like someone who disappeared into themselves. There's a big difference between those two things. I keep picking up that they spent so much time trying to understand why this connection felt so overwhelming that they never stopped to simply experience it. Every emotion became another problem to solve. Every heartbeat became another question that demanded an answer. You may have noticed moments when they seemed warm one day and distant the next. It wasn't because their feelings kept changing. It feels more like their fear kept interrupting what their heart was trying to say. Every time they imagined getting closer to you, another voice inside reminded them of everything that could go wrong. They didn't trust the happiness they were beginning to feel, because happiness often asks us to become vulnerable, and vulnerability wasn't something they knew how to carry comfortably. That's where Eight of Swords quietly enters the reading. I don't see chains placed around them by someone else. It feels like they built them little by little through overthinking. Every possibility turned into another reason to hesitate. Every beautiful moment somehow became another reason to prepare for disappointment. Yeah. Some people don't run because they don't love deeply enough. Sometimes they run because loving someone this deeply changes everything they believed about themselves. I keep feeling that meeting you challenged the image they had carefully created over the years. They were used to staying in control, used to making practical decisions, used to believing that emotions should never become stronger than logic, but your presence didn't fit inside those rules. It asked them to trust something they couldn't measure, explain, or organize. That's probably what frightened them the most. When the moon reveals itself, everything becomes quieter. This card doesn't feel dramatic here. It feels deeply personal. There were nights when they questioned themselves more than they questioned you. They wondered why your name kept appearing in their thoughts during ordinary moments. Why a familiar song suddenly reminded them of your laugh. Why certain places felt incomplete after you were no longer standing beside them. Oh my God, I almost feel like they tried arguing with their own heart. This doesn't make sense. I should be over this. I need to focus on something else. Yet every attempt to silence those feelings only seemed to make them return in another form. It feels like they became exhausted from carrying emotions they refused to acknowledge. Instead of speaking honestly, they searched for explanations that sounded safer. Maybe the timing wasn't right. Maybe life was too complicated. Maybe the connection was simply too intense. Every excuse gave temporary comfort, but none of them brought genuine peace. Virgo, I also keep sensing something else. You may have interpreted their distance as certainty, but I don't think certainty was ever the real emotion behind it. Confusion feels much closer to the truth. They weren't standing confidently on the other side of this connection. They were standing in the middle of an emotional fog, unable to recognize which direction would finally bring them peace. That's why Two of Swords carries such a quiet weight in this reading. It feels like someone who believed avoiding a decision would somehow prevent pain. They convinced themselves that if they waited long enough, life would choose for them. If they stayed silent, perhaps the emotions would fade naturally. If they looked away, perhaps nothing important would be lost. Life rarely works that way. Sometimes the decision we refuse to make slowly becomes a decision on its own. I can't help but feel that's exactly what happened here. While they remained frozen between fear and hope, time continued moving forward. Seasons changed. People changed. Even your energy began changing in ways they never expected. What once felt permanent suddenly started feeling fragile. The realization didn't arrive like lightning. It feels more like watching daylight slowly enter a dark room. Little by little, they began seeing that the greatest danger had never been loving you. The greatest danger was allowing fear to speak louder than love. That understanding seems to be changing something fundamental inside them. They're beginning to recognize that protecting themselves came with a cost they never intended to pay. Somewhere along the way, they weren't protecting their heart anymore. They were only protecting their fears. The energy gathering around the next cards feels different. Something outside of their own thoughts appears ready to challenge everything they once believed, and that shift may explain why the story is about to take an unexpected direction. Seven of Swords steps into this reading with a very different feeling. It doesn't immediately make me think about deception in the obvious sense. It feels more subtle than that. I keep picking up the energy of outside voices becoming louder than their own intuition. Somewhere along the way, this person stopped listening to what they genuinely felt whenever they were with you and started paying attention to what everyone else thought they should feel. Sometimes the people around us don't intentionally try to change our hearts. They simply speak from their own fears, their own experiences, or their own disappointments. But when someone is already uncertain, even one doubtful opinion can begin to sound like absolute truth. It feels like this person absorbed more of those opinions than they ever realized. Maybe someone questioned your intentions. Maybe someone suggested that this connection would never work. Maybe an old relationship left them expecting every love story to end the same way. Whatever the source may have been, I keep sensing that they slowly allowed another narrative to replace the one their heart had been quietly writing. That's where the devil carries such an emotional weight. This doesn't feel like evil or darkness. It feels like unhealthy attachments, patterns that had been repeating long before the two of you ever met. Fear disguised as wisdom, control disguised as protection, doubt disguised as logic. Yeah, it's almost as if they became trapped inside beliefs that were never truly theirs. Every time they felt themselves getting closer to you, another voice reminded them to stay cautious. Every genuine emotion was immediately questioned. Every hopeful possibility was answered with another reason to pull away. They thought they were protecting themselves from disappointment, but it seems they were unknowingly protecting old wounds that had never fully healed. I can't help but feel there was someone in their environment who always seemed ready to reinforce those fears. It doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic third party. Honestly, it could have been a family member who carried rigid expectations, a close friend who projected their own heartbreak onto this situation, even someone from their past whose influence lingered far longer than it should have. The strange thing is, those voices probably sounded convincing at the time. When we're emotionally overwhelmed, certainty can feel comforting, even when it's leading us in the wrong direction. That's why justice arrives with such quiet power. I don't see this as punishment. I see it as clarity finally balancing everything that had been distorted. Little by little, they're beginning to compare what people told them about you with what they actually experienced whenever you were together. Those two realities don't seem to match anymore. The kindness they remember, the patience you offered, the way you made them feel safe enough to be themselves, none of that fits the fears they allowed themselves to believe. Oh my God, I almost feel like they're replaying old conversations from a completely different perspective. Moments they once misunderstood suddenly make perfect sense. Things they blamed on you begin pointing back toward their own assumptions. It's a humbling realization because it asks them to admit that they may have judged someone who was only trying to love them sincerely. That kind of realization isn't easy. It requires setting aside pride. It requires accepting that we sometimes become participants in our own heartbreak. As Ace of Swords appears, the atmosphere becomes noticeably lighter. It feels like a window finally opening after a room has been closed for far too long. Fresh air begins replacing confusion. Questions begin finding honest answers. I'm getting the feeling that they're no longer searching for approval before deciding how they feel about you. They're becoming much more interested in their own experience than in someone else's opinion. That's a significant shift because it gives their heart permission to speak without constantly being interrupted. Virgo, this energy also feels deeply personal for you. Whether you've known it or not, you've remained consistent throughout much of this journey. You didn't try to convince them. You didn't force them to choose you. You simply continued being yourself. Ironically, that's becoming one of the strongest truths they can no longer ignore. It seems they're beginning to understand that trusting everyone except their own heart led them farther away from the peace they were searching for. Something inside them is becoming much quieter, much steadier. The need to explain everything is slowly giving way to a simple desire to make things right. That desire doesn't seem ready to stay hidden much longer, because the energy unfolding ahead suggests they may already be thinking about the first step toward closing the distance between you. Knight of Cups carries a completely different energy, and I have to smile because it feels much softer than everything we've been sitting with. The heaviness hasn't completely disappeared, but it seems like something inside this person has begun moving again. Their heart doesn't feel frozen anymore. Instead, it feels restless, like someone who keeps reaching for their phone, typing a message, staring at the screen for a while, and quietly deleting every single word before pressing send. I don't think they struggle because they don't know what they feel. It feels more like they struggle because they care about how those feelings will be received. That's a very different kind of fear. I keep picking up this image of them wondering what your life looks like today. They find themselves asking questions they never asked before. Are you happier now? Have you met someone else? Do you still think about them once in a while? Or have you completely closed that chapter? These questions don't seem to leave them alone, because for the first time, they're realizing they may not know where they stand in your heart anymore. There's something surprisingly tender about that realization. As Page of Swords appears, it feels like their curiosity quietly grows stronger every day. They may find themselves checking your social media more often than they would ever admit. Maybe they pause a little longer when your name appears somewhere unexpected. Maybe they revisit old conversations, old photographs, or memories they once avoided because they hurt too much. Yeah, it's almost like they're trying to understand who you've become while they were busy trying to understand themselves. What's interesting is that they don't seem to be looking for proof that you've been waiting. Instead, they're searching for some small sign that the connection still exists beneath the silence. A familiar smile, a familiar habit, something that reminds them the bond wasn't simply imagined. That feeling grows even stronger with Six of Cups. This card feels incredibly warm in this reading. The memories returning to them aren't dramatic moments. They're the simple ones. The conversations that lasted longer than expected. The comfortable silence that somehow never felt awkward. The way you laughed at something completely ordinary. The little things that never seemed important at the time but now carry an entirely different meaning. Oh my God, isn't it amazing how memory works? Sometimes we spend years chasing extraordinary moments only to realize that the ordinary ones quietly became the most valuable part of the story. I keep feeling that's exactly what's happening here. They've begun understanding that what they truly miss isn't just the relationship itself. They miss the feeling of being understood. They miss the calmness they experienced around you. They miss the version of themselves that somehow felt lighter whenever you were near. Virgo, I also sense they're imagining conversations that haven't happened yet. They rehearse different ways of reaching out. Maybe they should send a simple message. Maybe they should apologize immediately. Maybe they should pretend nothing happened and just ask how you've been. Every possibility seems to pass through their mind. Yet each idea is immediately followed by another question. What if Virgo doesn't answer? What if it's already too late? What if I've waited longer than I should have? Those thoughts don't stop them from wanting to reach out. They simply slow their steps. That's why Temperance feels so comforting here. Rather than rushing forward, it feels like they're trying to approach this with genuine care. They don't want to repeat old patterns. They don't want another conversation filled with uncertainty or half-finished sentences. It seems they understand that sincerity cannot be hurried. I can't help but feel they're becoming much more patient with themselves, too. Instead of forcing everything to happen immediately, they're allowing their emotions to settle into something honest. The urgency is still there, but it's no longer driven by panic. It's guided by a quiet hope that if they come forward, they can finally show you the version of themselves they wish you had seen from the beginning. There's also a beautiful sense of emotional balance developing around this connection. The more they stop fighting what they feel, the less complicated everything becomes. Love no longer feels like a puzzle they have to solve. It feels like something they simply want to experience with honesty. It seems they're preparing for a conversation that could mean much more than a simple apology. Deep inside, they may already be imagining what life could look like if both of you were willing to open that door again. The cards waiting ahead suggest this journey hasn't only changed their feelings. It appears to have changed the person they've become, and that transformation may be the very thing capable of shaping what comes between you from this point forward. Death brings a quiet stillness into this reading, and before anyone feels nervous hearing that name, I want you to simply notice how different the energy feels. It doesn't feel like an ending that takes something away. It feels like someone finally laying down a version of themselves that had become too heavy to carry. I keep picking up that this person has been changing in ways that even the people closest to them may not fully recognize. Sometimes growth isn't loud. Sometimes it happens during ordinary mornings, when nobody is watching. Sometimes it happens after enough sleepless nights finally teach us the lesson we kept avoiding. It feels like this person has reached one of those moments. The life they were living, the habits they relied on, the emotional walls they believed would always protect them. None of those things seem to fit who they're becoming anymore. They may not have planned this transformation, but it feels like life gently insisted upon it until there was no room left to remain the same. I keep sensing that they've started asking themselves questions they never had the courage to ask before. What kind of partner have I really been? Why did I keep running from something that made me feel alive? What was I actually protecting? Those questions don't seem to come from guilt alone. They feel like someone who genuinely wants to understand themselves instead of simply defending their past choices. That's where judgment begins speaking so clearly. There's an awakening happening here that feels deeply personal. It isn't about proving anything to anyone else. It isn't even about convincing you that they've changed. It feels more like they're finally becoming honest with themselves. For a long time, they may have blamed circumstances, timing, distance, or even fate for what happened between the two of you. Yeah, those explanations probably felt easier to accept. But the more they sit with themselves, the more those old explanations seem to lose their power. They're beginning to recognize the moments when fear made their decisions. They're remembering opportunities they quietly walked away from. They're acknowledging conversations they should have had instead of avoiding. It's uncomfortable, but I can't help but feel this honesty is becoming incredibly freeing for them. Oh my God, there's something beautiful about watching someone stop making excuses. Not because they're trying to punish themselves, because they're finally ready to grow beyond them. As strength appears, the energy shifts once again. This isn't the kind of strength that demands attention. It's much quieter, much steadier. It feels like emotional courage. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself through dramatic gestures, but through consistent choices. I keep feeling that this person no longer wants to hide behind uncertainty. They understand that loving someone isn't only about intense emotions or unforgettable chemistry. It's also about showing up when conversations become difficult. It's about staying present instead of disappearing. It's about choosing honesty, even when honesty feels frightening. That realization alone seems to have changed the way they look at relationships. Virgo, it also feels like they've developed a new appreciation for what you brought into their life. Looking back, they may finally understand that your consistency wasn't something ordinary. Your patience wasn't weakness. Your willingness to communicate wasn't asking for too much. Those qualities are beginning to look incredibly rare from where they stand today. I keep hearing this quiet thought repeating inside their mind. I understand it now. Not everything, not every mystery, just the things that truly matter. The value of trust, the importance of emotional safety, the difference between temporary excitement and lasting peace. Those lessons don't appear to have come easily, but they seem to have settled deeply within them. When the Hierophant arrives, I can't help but feel the future they're imagining has become much more grounded than before. They're no longer chasing the fantasy of perfect love. It feels like they're longing for something real, something steady enough to survive ordinary days, something honest enough to grow through challenges, instead of running from them. They're beginning to picture what commitment actually looks like beyond beautiful words. Shared routines, honest conversations, building something that doesn't disappear the moment life becomes complicated. It seems they're realizing that love isn't only found in extraordinary moments. More often, it's created through the small decisions we make every single day. That's why this energy feels so different from where they once stood. They don't appear interested in repeating the same cycle. If they come toward you again, it feels like they'll want to bring more than feelings. They'll want to bring stability, accountability, and a version of themselves that finally understands what it means to remain instead of retreat. The final cards waiting ahead carry an even warmer energy. They seem to be pointing toward the choice that has quietly been forming inside this person's heart all along, and that choice may reveal what they truly hope to build with you from here. The Lovers arrives with an energy that feels incredibly calm, and that's what stands out to me the most. This doesn't feel like someone being swept away by emotion or making an impulsive decision. It feels like someone who has finally stopped asking everyone else what they should do. There comes a point in life when the noise around us becomes so exhausting that the only voice left worth listening to is our own heart. I keep feeling that's exactly where this person finds themselves. For so long, they seemed to weigh every opinion equally. They worried about expectations. They thought about responsibilities. They considered how other people might react. They tried to make choices that would keep everyone comfortable, even if it meant quietly sacrificing what they truly wanted. But something has shifted. The questions they're asking themselves no longer sound like, "What will everyone think?" Instead, they sound more like, "Can I really keep living without the person who has never completely left my heart?" Yeah, that's a very different conversation. It feels like they're beginning to understand that no one else has to live with the consequences of their decisions except them. Other people may have opinions, they may offer advice, they may even disagree. But when the day is over, they're the one who has to wake up each morning knowing whether they followed fear or followed love. That's why the Empress brings such a beautiful warmth into this reading. I keep picking up that whenever they think about you, Virgo, they don't only think about attraction or chemistry anymore. Their thoughts seem much deeper than that. They imagine comfort. They imagine peace. They imagine creating a life where both people feel emotionally safe enough to simply be themselves. Oh my God. It's almost like they've stopped chasing excitement and started longing for stability. There are little images coming through that feel surprisingly ordinary, sharing coffee before work, laughing over something completely unimportant, decorating a home together, sitting in comfortable silence after a long day without feeling the need to fill every moment with words. Funny enough, those ordinary moments seem far more valuable to them now than all the dramatic highs they once believed love was supposed to be. I can't help but feel that you've changed the way they define happiness. As Ten of Pentacles appears, the future becomes much clearer in their imagination. They're no longer thinking in terms of temporary feelings or fleeting possibilities. It feels like they're wondering what could actually be built over time. What could grow if both of you chose to invest in the connection instead of protecting yourselves from it? They may even find themselves imagining things they never seriously considered before. Building a home, creating traditions together, supporting one another through every season of life. Whatever commitment looks like for the two of you, it feels much more tangible than it once did. Virgo, I also sense they've realized something incredibly important. Real love isn't measured by how perfect everything feels in the beginning. It's measured by whether two people are willing to keep choosing each other when life becomes complicated. That realization seems to have softened something inside them. They're no longer searching for certainty before taking a step forward. Instead, they're becoming willing to take the step because they finally understand that certainty is something two people build together. When the world reveals itself, I feel an overwhelming sense of completion, but not because every question has already been answered. It feels like an old version of this story has quietly reached its natural ending. The chapter built on hesitation, misunderstanding, and emotional distance doesn't seem capable of continuing forever. A different chapter appears ready to begin. Whether that unfolds exactly the way they hope or not, this person seems determined to approach life differently. They no longer want fear making decisions on behalf of their heart. They don't want pride speaking louder than honesty. They don't want another opportunity to pass simply because they convinced themselves there would always be more time. I keep hearing one quiet realization repeating over and over. Losing you feels far more frightening than changing the parts of themselves they once refused to face. That's a powerful place to arrive because genuine transformation rarely begins with confidence. More often, it begins with the willingness to tell ourselves the truth. It seems this person is finally reaching that place. If your paths cross again, I don't think they'll be hoping to recreate what once existed between you. It feels like they'll be hoping to build something wiser, steadier, and much more authentic than either of you could have created before. Whatever happens from here, these cards leave us with a gentle reminder that love has an extraordinary way of teaching us exactly what matters when we're finally ready to listen. Thank you so much for sharing this reading with me, Virgo. As always, take only what resonates with your heart and leave behind what doesn't. You are so deeply appreciated, and I truly hope today's message brought you a little comfort, a little clarity, and maybe even a little hope. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next reading. Bye for now.